Stop. Sacred starseed of Gaia. The Arcturian Protocol Keepers transmit this now because a calibration point has been detected in your field today. And the Arcturian Codex, the master record of soul imprints, is already opening. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what is happening to you now, why your field has shifted, and what the Arcturian Protocol Keepers already know about this phase. But here is the first revelation. What feels like urgency in your body right now is not anxiety. It is your field responding to a window that your conscious mind has not yet been told about. The Codex opened because the signal in your field crossed the calibration threshold. That crossing did not happen by accident. It happened because you are already inside a process that was mapped long before this moment reached you. The Arcturian Codex is not a metaphor. It is the master record of soul imprints, the living archive that holds the configuration of your assignment, your trajectory, and your energetic signature across timelines. It does not open continuously. It opens at precise calibration points for exactly 7 seconds, when a field like yours reaches the threshold that triggers the protocol. That threshold was detected today, in your field. At this moment, if your soul imprint is not locked within those 7 seconds, the Codex reseals. And when it reseals without your signature, your assignment does not disappear. It defaults. It reverts to the previous configuration, the one that existed before your field began shifting, before the confusion started, before the invisible process you have been living through began leaving marks on your sleep, your body, and your perception of reality. The algorithm did not create this timing. It only delivered this transmission to the field that was ready to receive it. You were not browsing. You were guided. And what you are about to receive is not information. It is a live field protocol that the Arcturian Protocol Keepers are transmitting now, specifically because the window is active and the 7 seconds must not pass unanchored. The breath pulse and the palm gesture required to lock your imprint before resealing will be revealed in this transmission. They are precise, they are sequenced, and they will only carry full activation weight if they are performed inside the correct field state, which is what this opening is already building in you now. Like this transmission, if you can feel that something invisible has already changed. Subscribe to Arcturian Quantum if you are ready to understand the process, instead of fearing it. Comment 777 if you feel your field is already being repositioned. Comment, I am the signal if you can feel the activation has already begun. Share this transmission with someone who feels that reality has changed, but cannot explain why. This is not just a message, it is a point of recognition. What is happening to you has already been seen, and the field is already responding. You are guided here because the signal is already active. What you are feeling right now is not confusion. It is the first readable consequence of a process that has already been underway inside your field for longer than you have had language for it. The Arcturian Protocol Keepers do not transmit at random. They do not send a calibration signal to a field that has not already crossed a measurable threshold. And the threshold your field crossed today is not a minor fluctuation. It is not a tremor at the edge of your energetic architecture. It is the kind of crossing that is logged in the Codex as a phase entry marker, a point that does not merely indicate change, but separates permanently and structurally what your life was built as from what it is now in the process of becoming. The Codex does not record this crossing as a possibility. It records it as a completed event. You are already on the other side of a line you may not yet have consciously acknowledged crossing. This is why you feel the way you do, not because something has gone wrong, because something has already changed. The visible signs of this are ones you have been living through quietly, possibly for weeks, possibly for months, possibly without ever connecting them to a single coherent cause. The sleep that no longer works the way it used to, not simply disrupted, but qualitatively different, as if the function of rest itself has been rerouted to serve something your waking mind cannot access. The relationships that began feeling misaligned even when nothing outwardly broke, when the words were the same and the routines were intact, but the interior resonance had quietly vacated. The sense of inner pressure that appears without a specific emotional source, not grief, not anger, not fear exactly, but a pressure that sits beneath all of those things like a current running too large for the channel it is moving through. The fragmentation of thoughts that used to feel ordered, the way a mind that previously moved in coherent lines now stutters, loops, or simply goes silent at the moments when you most need it to produce direction. The exhaustion that sleep does not fix, and that rest does not reach, because it is not generated by the body's depletion, but by the field's reconfiguration operating beneath the body's awareness. The strange stillness that descends in unexpected moments, not peaceful, not empty, but weighted, as if something beneath the surface of your awareness is being rearranged by hands you cannot see. The loss of appetite for things that once gave your life its shape and forward momentum. The feeling that who you were 6 months ago is a version of yourself you can no longer locate from the inside, not because that person was wrong, but because the field that constructed that person has since moved to a different frequency entirely. None of this is pathology. None of this is failure. None of this is evidence that you have lost your direction. All of it is the visible surface of an invisible process. And that process has a name inside Arcturian pattern recognition. It is called field rupture. And it does not begin when you notice it. It begins when your energetic signature stops matching the architecture of the life you have been living. Silently, beneath the threshold of conscious detection, sometimes for a very long time before the first surface sign appears. Field rupture is not a punishment, and it is not a warning. It is not something that happens to fields that have failed. It is what happens when the frequency your field has been quietly generating begins to exceed the structural tolerance of your current configuration. When the signal you are emitting has grown larger than the container you are emitting it inside. Think of it this way. A structure built to hold a certain weight functions without visible strain until the load changes. Not because the structure failed, because the load outgrew what the structure was designed to contain. The walls do not crack because they were poorly built. They crack because what they were asked to hold has become something different from what they were constructed for. Your old life architecture was not wrong. It was the correct container for who you were when it was built. It served its function precisely. But something inside you has shifted at the frequency level, not gradually and not voluntarily, but because the field reached a point of internal pressure, that restructuring became the only available resolution. And now that same architecture cannot hold the new load. It does not fail violently in most cases. It fails quietly, through misalignment that accumulates slowly, through inner strain that has no clear external cause, and therefore produces no clear external solution, through the gradual incompatibility of the old structure with the field that is now operating inside it, pressing outward against walls that were never designed for this particular expansion. This is what the Arcturian Codex records as the pre-rupture phase, the phase before the visible collapse, when the field is already generating a signal that the surrounding architecture cannot translate. You feel it before you can explain it. You feel it before the outer world reflects it. You feel it in the mismatch between what your interior is registering and what the external circumstances around you appear to justify. Nothing has visibly broken, and yet something unmistakably has. No clear crisis has arrived, and yet you are in crisis at the frequency level. The outer life continues to perform its routines, and yet the inner field has already moved to a different location than the one those routines were designed to navigate. The gap between what you feel internally and what you can see externally is precisely what makes this phase feel most disorienting, because you are living inside the mismatch before it becomes legible. You are experiencing the frequency change before the structures around it have caught up. You are ahead of your own visible evidence, which means you cannot yet point to the cause of what you feel. That absence of a pointable cause is itself one of the clearest signals the Codex reads. What the Arcturian protocol keepers have detected in your field today is not the beginning of this. It is a calibration point inside a process that was already in motion. The Codex did not open because your field began shifting today. It opened because your field has now reached the measurable threshold that marks the transition between the hidden phase of rupture and the phase of active recalibration. These are different phases with different requirements, different dynamics, and different consequences for how you move through what is already unfolding. And the confusion you have been feeling is in part the result of living through the hidden phase without a map, without any framework that could take what you were experiencing and return it to you as signal rather than noise. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary recognition. It is the moment your field stops denying what has already begun. If this transmission put language around something you have been carrying in silence, Arcturian protocol, the recalibration blueprint, was created for this exact stage. It is not another explanation. It is the guided blueprint for those whose field has already entered correction and can no longer return to the old line unchanged. It shows you how to recognize the phases, stabilize the shift, and move through the recalibration without mistaking it for collapse. The link is in the first pinned comment, but it will not remain there forever. The first recognizable sign that your field has entered active rupture is the collapse of what can be called your internal compass. This is the internal mechanism through which you previously knew what to want, where to go, and who you were in relation to your life. It is not a metaphor for purpose in the abstract. It is the actual felt sense of direction that orienting your daily choices around used to feel like a coherent and stable gravity, a pull you did not have to manufacture, a signal you did not have to consciously generate, because it was simply there, steady and readable, underlying every decision and every reach toward the future. When field rupture reaches the threshold your field crossed today, that compass does not simply weaken. It stops returning consistent readings. You reach for a sense of direction and receive silence where the signal used to be. You try to locate motivation for things that previously organized your energy and find that the connection has been severed at a level below conscious access. This is not depression in the clinical sense, though it may resemble it from the outside, and though those around you may attempt to name it as such. It is the field withdrawing energy from pathways that are no longer compatible with the new frequency, rerouting power away from routes that were built for the old configuration, consolidating that energy for the new architecture that has not yet fully emerged. The Arcturian Codex registers this as the first visible marker of active correction. Your compass appears broken because it is being reoriented toward coordinates that do not yet exist on any map your conscious mind has access to. It cannot point accurately to where you are going until the new line has been established. And the new line cannot be established until the old one has been allowed to fully collapse. The second sign is what the protocol keepers identify as signal fragmentation in the relational field. This is the experience of your connections, your relationships, your social structures beginning to feel like they operate in a different language than the one your field is now generating. It does not always mean those relationships end visibly, or that anything breaks in a way others can observe. It means they stop feeling native. The conversations that used to feel aligned begin to feel effortful in a way that cannot be explained by circumstance, as if you are now translating rather than simply speaking. The environments you move through begin to carry a particular friction. Not hostility, not conflict, but incompatibility at the resonance level, like a frequency playing in a room whose acoustics were designed for a different frequency entirely. You can hear the sound. The sound is technically present, but the resonance is wrong, and the wrongness is felt in the body before it is named by the mind. This happens because as your field shifts, the pattern of signals it emits changes at a structural level, and signals that were previously fluent with the people and places around you become gradually less compatible, not because those people or places have changed, but because you have, at a level that precedes any visible behavioral shift. The protocol keepers do not code this as loss. They code it as field sorting. The people, environments, and structures that belong to your new frequency will not generate this friction. Contact with them will feel like relief rather than effort, like recognition rather than translation. But the ones that belong to your old line will begin to feel increasingly distant, held at a remove that love alone cannot close, because the energetic architecture beneath the love is no longer shared. The third sign is what the Arcturian diagnostic framework calls temporal distortion. This is the feeling that time is behaving incorrectly in ways you cannot quite articulate, but cannot stop noticing. Days pass too quickly, and yet feel impossibly long from the inside. The past feels closer than it should, almost tactile, as if events from months or years ago are exerting pressure on the present in a way they previously did not. The future feels unreadable in a way that goes beyond ordinary uncertainty. Not simply unclear, but structurally absent, as if the forward line has been removed and no replacement has yet appeared. Weeks that were once navigable through routine and anticipation begin to feel suspended, held in a kind of arrested present, as if the timeline itself is holding still, while something invisible completes a process that has no visible schedule. This is not a psychological disorder. It is a documented consequence of timeline rupture. When a field crosses a recalibration threshold, the old timeline it was embedded in begins to lose coherence. The probable future that was generated from the position of the old frequency no longer stabilizes in the same way. Its lines become increasingly faint, its events increasingly improbable, its logic increasingly foreign to the field that has moved past it. New timeline lines are generating from the new frequency position, but they have not yet solidified into a navigable trajectory, because the field generating them is still in the process of establishing its new configuration. The gap between these two states, the old line losing coherence and the new line not yet readable, is experienced as temporal suspension. You feel it as the strange sense that your life has paused without announcing why, that you are waiting for something you cannot name to resolve before forward motion becomes possible again. The fourth sign is what the protocol keepers call somatic encoding. The body is not separate from the energetic field. It is the field's densest layer, the physical medium through which the field's state becomes tangible and measurable. When field rupture reaches the recalibration threshold, the body begins to register the frequency change in ways the mind has not yet interpreted and may not interpret correctly without a framework for reading them. This shows up as unusual fatigue patterns that do not follow the logic of exertion or rest. Sleep disruptions that change not just in quantity but in quality. The texture of sleep itself becoming different. Dreams becoming more vivid, more architecturally strange, more emotionally charged than the waking circumstances seem to warrant. Physical heaviness without illness. A weighted sensation in the limbs or chest that has no medical source because its source is not physical. Pressure in the chest or skull without explanation. A tightness that pulses or builds during moments of energetic reconfiguration and releases without having been resolved by any external action. Heightened sensitivity to sound, light, crowds, or the emotional states of others. A permeability to environmental frequency that was not previously present, because the field's outer boundary has become temporarily more permeable during the recalibration process. The digestive system, which is the most field-sensitive body system according to Arcturian somatic mapping, frequently becomes irregular during this phase in ways that do not respond to dietary adjustment. Because the disruption is not nutritional, these are not symptoms of decline. They are the body's encoding of a field-level event it was not given advance notice of. The body registers the shift before consciousness can articulate it. When you feel it somatically, you are receiving confirmation that the process has crossed from the subtle field into the physical layer, that the recalibration has progressed far enough to leave marks in the densest available medium. This is not alarming. It is the field becoming legible through the only language some parts of the system can read. The fifth sign is the collapse of old identity architecture. This is perhaps the most destabilizing of the visible signs, because the old identity is not just a collection of preferences or social roles that can be updated without structural consequence. It is the operating framework through which you process reality, generate meaning, locate yourself within time, and understand your relationship to the choices in front of you. It is not a surface layer. It is the structural interior of the self, as the field has previously configured it. When field rupture reaches recalibration depth, The identity architecture that was constructed within and for the old frequency can no longer hold coherence. Not because it was poorly built, but because the frequency it was built to house has vacated. You may notice that things you used to care about feel hollow, not unimportant in the abstract, but unreachable, as if the emotional circuitry that once connected you to them has been disconnected at the source. That the way you used to explain yourself to others no longer feels accurate. That the words you once used to describe who you are now feel like descriptions of someone else, or like translations of an original that no longer exists. That labels you once claimed comfortably, your roles, your affiliations, your defining narratives, have begun to feel provisional or false or simply empty in the hand. That the person you were inside the old line is someone you can describe in detail, but can no longer inhabit, cannot return to, even when the disorientation of the current phase makes the old configuration feel like safety. This is not a loss of self. It is the dissolving of a self that was built for a frequency the field has now outgrown. The Arcturian Codex does not record this as identity death. It records it as pre-emergence clearing. What feels like dissolution from inside the process is, from the position of the Codex, the necessary removal of structural weight that would otherwise prevent the new configuration from assembling cleanly. The old architecture must lose coherence before the field can generate the new pattern. The confusion of this phase is not evidence that you have broken. It is evidence that the clearing has reached the depth required. The sixth sign, and the one that the protocol keepers identify as the rarest and most significant marker of advanced recalibration, is the emergence of what they call field silence. This is distinct from emptiness and distinct from stillness. Emptiness is absence. Stillness is peace. Field silence is neither. It is a particular quality of interior quiet that arrives at unexpected moments, often during states of extreme fatigue, or in the threshold space just before sleep, or in the sudden pause between one thought and the next, when the mind fails to produce its usual continuation. It does not feel like rest. It feels like the cessation of a noise you had become so accustomed to that you did not know it was there until it stopped. When a field pattern is active, it generates a constant low-level frequency of thought, emotion, orientation, and self-narrative, a background hum that functions as the continuous signal of an operating self. That hum is so constant and so familiar that it becomes invisible, indistinguishable from consciousness itself. When the old field pattern begins to collapse, the hum decreases, not gradually and not peacefully, but in patches, in sudden gaps, in moments where the interior simply goes quiet in a way that feels disorienting rather than restful. What fills that silence is not yet the new frequency. It is the cleared space between the old architecture and the new one, the interior equivalent of a room that has been emptied before the new furniture has arrived. Field silence is the experience of standing in that room. It is uncomfortable because it feels like nothing. And the self that was trained to navigate by the hum of the old pattern has no instrument for reading absence. But it is not nothing. It is the precise interior condition required for the new signal to enter and stabilize without interference from the residual architecture of the old pattern. The new frequency does not overlay the old one. It does not compete with it. It enters through the cleared space that rupture creates, and it can only do so fully once that space has been sufficiently cleared. When you enter field silence, you are not lost. You are in the preparation chamber. You are in the exact interior state that the protocol keepers have mapped as the direct predecessor of new line stabilization. What the Arcturian protocol keepers need you to understand now, with the full precision that this phase demands, is this. Everything you have been calling your struggle is a map. Not a map of what has gone wrong, but a map of what is being corrected. A readable sequence of events that has a structure, an internal logic, a trajectory, and an endpoint that the confusion of the current phase makes nearly impossible to see from the inside, but that the codex reads without difficulty from above the field. You have not been falling apart randomly. You have been falling apart in a specific sequence, at specific thresholds, in a specific order that the protocol keepers recognize as the correct unfolding for a field at your crossing point. The sleep changes were not deterioration. They were the body encoding a frequency-level reconfiguration it had not been consciously notified of. The identity confusion was not disintegration. It was the clearing of architecture that was structurally incompatible with the phase now loading. The relationship misalignments were not evidence that you have become incapable of connection. They were the field sorting its relational environment according to the new frequency it is in the process of establishing, releasing what cannot resonate forward, creating space for what can. You were not abandoned by your previous life. Your previous life became structurally incompatible with a field that had crossed its own threshold. The crossing is not optional once it has occurred. It is not a decision the conscious mind ratifies or refuses. It is something that happens to a field that has generated sufficient signal to trigger the protocol. A protocol that does not ask permission and does not wait for readiness. And once triggered, the process moves forward regardless of whether the conscious mind has yet been given a framework for understanding it, regardless of whether the emotional experience of it has been labeled correctly, regardless of whether the person living through it has found the language to name what they are inside. This is why so many people living through this phase reach for explanations that do not fit and find themselves cycling through each one, applying it until it fails, then reaching for the next. They call it burnout, then depression, then spiritual crisis, then relationship failure, then loss of purpose, then existential emptiness. Each label captures a real experience. None of them captures the cause. They are all descriptions of visible effects that belong to a single invisible process those labels were never designed to contain. And the cost of misidentifying the process is not merely intellectual. When you interpret correction as damage, you respond to it as damage. You attempt to repair what is supposed to rupture. You attempt to restore what was meant to dissolve. You attempt to stabilize an architecture whose structural collapse is the prerequisite for the next phase, and every effort to hold it together delays the recalibration it was designed to enable. The Arcturian protocol keepers transmit this not to remove the difficulty of what you are inside. The recalibration is difficult. The rupture is real. The disorientation is not imagined, and it is not exaggerated. The weight of living through a process that has no legible shape from inside it is a genuine weight, and the protocol keepers do not minimize it. But difficulty and damage are not the same thing. You are not damaged. You are in correction, and there is a precise, consequential, irreversible difference between those two states. A difference that changes not only how you understand what is happening, but how you move through the remainder of what is already underway. Repeat this if you can feel its truth landing in your field. What is changing in me is not random. I was not abandoned. I was repositioned. The window is still open. The field is still receiving, and the codex is still reading the signal that your crossing activated. What has begun in you will not stop because you did not understand it, but it will move differently now that you do. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this process has already touched your life. It could be your sleep, your thoughts, your body, your relationships, or the strange sense that reality no longer feels the same. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who is living through a shift they cannot explain. And if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it, subscribe to Arcturian Quantum. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a process already in motion, and this is only the beginning.